Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar. If you have any questions along the way for our presenters, you can type them into the GoToWebinar chat box, likely on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any tech questions, you can also type them there. We will be sending out the recording and materials from today's workshop by the end of the day tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that email. And without further ado, I will now hand it over to you, Lydia.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. This is my second time presenting with the Nonprofit Learning Lab and ACN. And today we'll be talking about captivating Canva graphics, unlock the power of design principles. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Lidia Varesco Racoma of Lidia Varesco Design in Chicago. I am a brand strategist and marketing designer. I'm also a blogger and a speaker, and I basically help on mission-focused organizations to share their message through branding and marketing. So let's jump right in. Just wanted to first mention ACN is a co-host, co-sponsor of this presentation. Yeah, I'm a member of ACN. I've been on the board and currently co-chair committee. So I'm very familiar with ACN. We're excited to partner with Nonprofit Learning Lab on these workshops. But you can head over to the ACN website to see some of the things that, that they offer, which include RFP service and a consultant directory. So today we'll be talking about a couple different things. We're going to start out talking about the building blocks of design. Then we'll talk about applying those design principles in Canva. And then we'll talk about the Canva brand kit, which is the tool inside Canva that helps you to maintain your brand. And then I'll talk a little bit about finding design assets. And we'll have some time for Q&A, and then you'll get a bunch of resources at the end as well. And you'll see that I'll be pointing out on the slides, certain slides where you will have a link to resources that you'll get once we get to the end of the presentation. All right, first we're going to take a couple of polls. So poll's going to pop up on your screen in a second here. The first one is, what type of Canva projects do you create most? And there's going to be a couple different things for you. Whoops. Couple different ones for you to choose from in that poll. Basically, just to kind of give me a sense of what everybody is working on in Canva. All right. Looks like our poll up. There we go. All right, just as I suspected. So most people are working on social media graphics and flyers. Okay, that's great. I think that this is going to be very helpful for you. A lot of what I'm going to be showing you is social media graphics, so I think that's going to be really helpful. All right, next poll. Which design principle do you struggle with most in Canva? And again, a screen's going to pop up. It's going to show you 4 different design principles. Ironically, the ones we're talking about today. So let's see. Here we go. So let's see which of these you feel like you're going to struggle with the most in Canva. I have a feeling which one's going to pop up, but let's see what happens. And like I mentioned, all 4 of these we're going to talk about today. So we will address any of those questions that have come up for you. All right, there we go. Oh, look at that, it was layout. I have to say, honestly, I thought it was going to be typography, but this is great. Like I mentioned, we're going to talk about all of these things today, so no worries. All right, so let's just jump right in. I know we've got 30 minutes and there's a lot that I want to talk about today, so I'm going to go as quickly as I can through the material. But the 4 building blocks of design we're going to talk about today are color, typography, layout, and imagery. And once you kind of get the basics of these 4, it really makes doing work in Canva so much easier, because I know that most of you probably that are working in Canva are not designers, and have not been or have not been trained in design. So it's really kind of hard sometimes when you're in Canva, either with a blank page, that overwhelm, or kind of the overwhelm of there's too many different types of templates, or different designs that I can go with. So first we're going to talk about color. And there's 3 different areas of color that I want to talk about today. So we'll talk a little bit about just overall color theory, and then we'll talk about color temperature, and then we'll talk about color formats that you would be using in Canva. So the first one is color theory. And again, this may not be familiar to people, that didn't go to art school, or that didn't study art or design, but color theory is basically the study of how colors work together and also how they affect people's emotions and perceptions. And this is used a lot, in with brands. You see I've got a couple of examples here. It basically, knowing color theory helps us understand which colors go well together, and it helps to guide good design choices, because sometimes, when you choose a couple of colors that are really not working together, it really reflects the design poorly. So here we have a couple of examples of some big brands and how they've used color theory. So with the Mountain Dew logo, they're using complementary colors, which are red and green. And we know that those, go well together. And then MasterCard has used a palette of analogous colors, which are colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So in this case, red, red, orange, and orange. And again, you can see that it's nice, it's visually pleasing. So now we'll talk a little bit about color temperature. So this is something that, most people are probably familiar with, either warm colors, cool colors. There's also something that we refer to as neutral colors. So the warm colors are really used when you want to convey energy, positivity, motion, excitement, and they stand out from the page. Literally, they kind of jump up on the page. And then the cool colors are a little bit more of that, like relaxation, calm, serenity, and those colors recede. So again, literally, they're kind of in the background. And again, this is part of that color theory. This is something that you learn when you're an artist in school, about colors that pop out and colors that recede. And this is also a good technique to know when you are designing Canva, because again, it's, color theory is just something that it's playing on people's emotions. And then the neutral colors we're generally using to accentuate, to complement, to maybe create a nice background. When you do have some of those bolder colors, you might want something a little more neutral to go along with it. So on the right, you can see an example here of a graphic that I created where we've got that cool blue background that is receding so that that worksheet stands out. And then we've got that little triangle of orange accent color that's popping up, that's really drawing your eye to that worksheet. So a little bit of color theory in action here. And then next we'll talk about color formats. So there's 2 color formats that you'll be using in Canva. The first one is a digital format, and that would be used for social media, web, email, any other kind of digital graphics, that everybody mentioned that you're using Canva for. And those are generally specified as a hex code or an RGB code. So you can see here in the screenshot, I've called out with the first arrow, the hex color. So that's got a hashtag and then a series of 6 numbers and letters. That's what makes up the hex codes. The next type of color format you may be using in Canva would be a print format. So that would be if you're doing printed pieces like a poster, a flyer, a postcard, something where you'll be saving it as a PDF and then maybe sending it to your print vendor to print out. And in that case, you'd want to be using CMYK. So that's the second arrow that I've called out. And CMYK is basically the color format that a print vendor would use. If you're having something physically printed, those are the colors used, on a printing press. So it's good to be aware. This is relatively new for Canva. I think in the last couple of years, they added this feature where you can add in CMYK colors, which is great, because sometimes those digital colors, when you go to print them, they don't look, how you've expected, or what, they don't match your brand color, which we don't want to happen. Now, the only thing to remember is that Canva does use RGB by default. So you do want to make sure that if you are printing a flyer or a poster or something, a banner, that you create the graphics in CMYK and you download them as such before you send them to your print vendor. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the brand kit. That's where you would see this little screenshot that I took with the colors. So the next category of the building blocks we'll talk about is typography. So typography we'll talk about, there's a lot you can talk about with the typography. This is probably my favorite category, but we'll talk about 4 things. We'll talk about different typeface categories. We'll talk about font attributes. We'll talk about font spacing, and then using multiple fonts. I think this is one that probably comes up quite often when people are using Canva. So the first one I've called out 4 primary typeface categories. Now there's plenty more, you know, if you have looked at typefaces or gone to different font websites, there's a lot of different styles that you can choose from. But I called out basically the 4 primary ones that you would find in Canva or just kind of in daily life in designs. And the first one is serif. So that's where you can see that first example at the top left, where they have a little little notch in the letters. That's called a serif, and it's also called a serif font. And then the one next to it is called a sans serif, and that's where it doesn't have the little notch. So that's kind of your typical, your Arial, your Helvetica, that type of typeface. And then next we have a script, and those are, again, those can kind of be subcategorized. This one's a bit of a handwritten script. There's some that are a little bit more formal, but it's basically something that looks like it's been written either by hand with a calligraphy pen. Any type of script can kind of fall in that category. And again, has a different look and feel. And then last we have what's called a slab serif. So I mentioned those serifs, those little notches. Well, this one's not a notch. It's really just like the name suggests, like a slab. It's really like a little box on each of those letters, a little bit of a chunkier look. And again, like the nice thing about looking at all these categories together like this is that you do see that that same word in a different typeface style really looks different. So it's nice to know the primary categories, and then you can choose according to the look and feel that you want your design to have. So next we'll talk about font attributes. And this is how we're creating a hierarchy and interest in the layout. So some of the different ways that you would be doing that with your fonts would be the size of the fonts, the weight of the font, whether you're doing a light weight of that font or a bold weight, whether you're choosing a Roman or italic typeface, and then again, the letter case. So is it all uppercase? Is it lowercase? Is it in small caps? And all of those are different ways that you can create that hierarchy and have your eye move through the page. So in these 2 examples, you can see that I've used a variety of font sizes, a variety of weights. So there's a lighter weight and a bold weight to kind of balance each other out. There's different letter cases, there's lowercase and uppercase, and all of these are used not only to create interest in the layout, but again, that hierarchy. So showing you what's most important, maybe what's second most important, and then, you know, what you really want the viewer to notice on the page. And then next we have font spacing. So this is how the letters are spaced out, and then how the lines are spaced out. So in Canva, or I should say in the design world, we call this kerning and leading. And in Canva, it's indicated as letter spacing and line spacing, because those design terms, of course, are, you know, a little bit hard for people to remember, you know, if you didn't learn them in design school. So you can think of it as letter spacing and line spacing. And the reason that we are wanting to pay attention to those is because it can either improve the readability or it can create kind of a look and feel in your design. So you can see in my examples here, the first one is, you know, kind of average letter and line spacing. The second one, I've added some line spacing to it. So it's starting to look a little bit different, kind of a different feel. And then in the third one, I've added letter spacing to it. And again, there's a very different feel. And that's probably something that you wouldn't do, every day in a design. But sometimes it's nice to have that option to kind of do something a little bit different, to call interest to a word or a headline. Next, we'll talk about using multiple fonts. So this one, as I mentioned, this can happen quite easily when you're playing around in Canva and you're like, oh, this is a cool font. Oh, this one's cool. And then next thing you know, you have like 10 different fonts. They're not really working together very nicely. So basically, I just tell people, just choose intentionally. Try to align them, so that they work together, they're complementary. Don't use too many fonts, start with 2. That's a nice balance. 3 is okay. But overall, you just want to make sure that they're complementing each other. So you can see in the first one, I've intentionally chosen a couple of fonts that don't really work well together. They seem a little bit jarring. And then in the second one, I've chosen 2 fonts that are really working together. So, and again, I varied the weight, of the fonts to have that, create that hierarchy, create that interest. But again, you can see that it's just a little bit more pleasing to the eye when the fonts are working together. Whether it's, sometimes as designers, we choose fonts together that have kind of a similar feel, or maybe they're both kind of round. But a lot of times it's just done by the eye, to be honest. So I think most of the time you can tell like, oh, this is not working, but start with 2, and then perhaps you could add, another one. All right, now we're going to talk about layout. And the 3 categories of layout that I want to talk about is white space, alignment, and hierarchy. And we did start talking a little bit about hierarchy, but we'll expand on that as well. So white space is what designers call the space around design elements. And it's basically just space that we've reserved in the layout so that there's breathing room, it's not feeling overwhelming to the viewer, and that it also helps to lead the viewer's eye, create a bit of focus and flow, and then help with the readability of the layout. So on this case, you can see on the left here, I've intentionally allowed that white space on the right side because there was an image there and it was interesting. I wanted some of those, elements of the image to shine through, kind of emphasize the vertical architectural theme of this association. So it's, again, I'm choosing that white space intentionally and also leaving a little bit of breathing room in the layout. And then on the right-hand side, in that example, there's some white space in between the logo, the heading, the body copy. And again, I could have crunched it all together, or I could have made it bigger, filled up all the space, but then it would have been hard to read, and it would have been hard to know, what should my eye read first, and then what should I read next? So again, we're creating some of that hierarchy as well in intentional use of white space. And next we'll talk about alignment. And this is the way that design elements and text are aligned to the margin or the page. Again, trying to get a good flow, readability, or even a mood for your design. So you can see in these examples that center aligned text feels a bit informal, friendly, fun, tone. And then the left aligned is a little bit more formal. That's what we're used to seeing in books or brochures. So again, making design choices intentionally to create a mood is really important when you're using Canva as well. And then next, hierarchy. So we've been discussing this because it's a very, very important design concept. It could have had its own category. It kind of, falls into a lot of these other categories because it is really important, but it's the way the elements are relating to each other on the page. And again, we're creating some interest on the page, creating emphasis in certain elements on the page, and moving the viewer's eye around the page, because otherwise, if there's no hierarchy, they don't know where to start, they don't know where to end. So on the left here, you can see I've used all those elements we've talked about, the different sizes and weights, a left alignment, some contrast between colors, some blocks of color. All of those are creating that hierarchy and moving the eye around the page. And then same thing on the right, I've got that more kind of informal, centered layout. I've got, again, an icon with a color block. And these things are all, again, I didn't need to put that color block. I didn't need to put that icon, but those are all elements that were intentionally chosen to draw the eye. We read from left to right. So a lot of times those important elements that are kind of pulling you into the page are starting on the left, top left. And then lastly, we have imagery. So imagery, we'll talk about different types of imagery, using it effectively, and then uploading them to Canva. So these are the 5 kind of basic types of imagery you may be using in Canva. I'll run through them a little bit quickly because I want to make sure we have some time for questions. Photography and illustration, everybody's familiar with it. Again, we want to choose it intentionally, align it with your brand and your mission, and then convey a theme or a mood. So you can see on the left side, we've got a photograph of people, of volunteers, emphasizing that mission. On the right side, we have an illustration that makes it, fun and friendly and welcoming. So again, just kind of being aware of what mood you want to create with either a photograph or an illustration is really important in Canva. And then next we have infographics. And this is a pretty big deal in Canva because they do have a tool that you can create infographics right in Canva, which is really great. And infographics are important because people respond to visuals much quicker than to a whole bunch of words, especially data. So if you do have data, it's really good to start using this tool, create some of those infographics. They have over 20 types of charts. So this type of pictograph, bar charts, line charts. And again, it helps people to process information a lot quicker. And then on those same lines, we have icons. And again, it's just another way to get your message across really quickly and easily to people, creating brand consistency. And again, Canva's got a built-in tool. There's one called Icon Scout. You can see, here I searched for an email envelope and a whole bunch of different ones, showed up. You can bring your own into Canva, but it's nice that you can, easily search right within the tool for icons. And lastly, video. So video is really important. Video is great for social media. Video posts are always at the top of engagement. So you want to try to build in video whenever you can. They have a pretty large library of videos you can choose from. A lot of them do require a pro account, so keep that in mind. You can, always purchase one on another site, bring it in. But like I said, bring stories to life, increases the engagement, and helps with SEO as well to have some video content. And now we'll talk about the brand kit. This one's really important. I wanted to make sure we have a little bit of time to talk about it. If you're not using the brand kit, I encourage everybody to use the brand kit in your organization. It's basically like a mini brand guide within Canva, so you can keep all your brand assets in this one place and help to keep your designs on brand, which is, ultimately the goal. So you can have, you can assign colors, your logos, your fonts, your brand fonts. There's an AI feature for brand voice. You can upload your photos, graphics, icons. It's really great. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to resources, but I just want to make sure that everybody is at least taking advantage of the brand guide in your organization. Just if you haven't, just test it out. You do need a pro account to take advantage of the full features. You can have a free account, but just keep in mind, it's good to have a pro account. And here's an example of, applying the brand kit to your designs. So here I have a design up here on the left-hand side. I've called up my brand kit, and you can see now I can easily access my logos, my color palette, my brand fonts, some photos. And again, like I mentioned in the resources, I'll have a little bit more info about using the brand kit. I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of it because it's a really, really great tool in Canva. Oh, and this is kind of a new feature. Of course, they're incorporating all these AI features into Canva, just like everybody else is doing. But they do have this AI generator that will write copy in your brand voice. So something kind of fun I've played around with a little bit. Basically, you establish your brand voice in the brand guide, and then you can ask it to write something for you. Again, like all AI, mixed results. But it's sometimes a nice way just to get started. So I encourage you to, once you set up your brand guide, just check it out and maybe play around with it for those social media posts. It can be really helpful. Okay, now we are getting close on time, so I'm going to kind of run through these a little bit quickly. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about finding design assets to use in Canva. So I know that there are a lot of things already built into Canva, but there are also a lot of outside sources you can go to. So we'll first talk about color. And again, you're going to get all these resources after the presentation, so don't worry about taking notes. But there's a whole bunch of websites that you can find color palettes. You can create your own color palettes. So it's really great. This way, if you're looking for inspiration, you're not limited to just what's within Canva. You can really go to some of these websites and get inspiration, get the color codes, and then input those into Canva. As far as fonts, again, there's a lot of fonts built into Canva, but if you love fonts like I do, there's a whole bunch of places you can go to. Adobe Fonts requires a subscription, but then there's Google Fonts, which is free. There's My Fonts, which I pulled a screenshot of that because they have a lot of really great fun fonts. Those you're just, paying by the font. I will caution you, be careful with free fonts, not necessarily Google, but if you're using a website that maybe you don't really know of, haven't heard of, just be cautious in using it. Make sure you're reading the font licensing because you may not be able to use it in all the ways that you'd like to. So just read those font licensing documents carefully wherever you are buying your fonts or downloading them. And then lastly, finding imagery. Again, within Canva, you can search for photos, you can search for images, illustrations, but there's lots of other websites. iStock, I've put the ones that I use quite often, which have both royalty-free and free versions. Again, we want to read the image licensing carefully. It may vary by the website that you're on. Even if it's a free image, you may not be able to use it however you want. So read those licensing accounts, agreements carefully. And again, all these resources you'll get at the end for all the various websites where you can get either royalty-free or free images in addition to Canva. And lastly, I wanted to end on this quote from Paul Rand, who's a really well-known art director, graphic designer. Design is the silent ambassador of your brand. And it's true, especially for nonprofits, it's very much true because your supporters, your people who are engaging you, they may see you, they may discover you from a social media graphic or an email newsletter, and you really want to make sure that your brand is expressed consistently, your mission is shining through, and that it will make them want to engage with them even more. And here, as I mentioned here, I've got a couple of codes that you can click to get the resources. So the first one is a whole bunch of resources. So you'll get a template for Canva. You get a link to several blog posts, some of those websites I mentioned for color, for layout, for fonts. So really a great place to get started with those design resources. The second code is a 60-minute Canva branding quick start session that I've started this summer. And basically, I put together your brand kit, show you how to use it, help you create some templates, answer any Canva questions. So it's a really great way to kind of get started in Canva if you're new, or just if you kind of, if you don't have a brand kit, we can get that set up for you. And then lastly, I just wanted to mention that I am launching a new product, which is a branding toolkit, and I am beta testing it currently. So if there's any smaller nonprofits, kind of startups on this workshop, you're interested in being a beta tester, getting it at a reduced price, in exchange for giving me feedback, reach out to me as well. But thank you so much, Nonprofit Learning Lab and ACN. I ran through this as quickly as I could. Like I mentioned, it's a lot to talk about, but I'm happy to stay a little bit later to answer some questions if there's anything that's come up.
Thank you. We do have some questions. The first one is, can you have more than one brand kit, especially when you're dealing with more than one brand?
Yes, and you can have, gosh, I don't know what their maximum is now. It's something like 100. So I've never maxed that out, that's for sure. But yes, you can have multiple brand kits. I will mention that with the free account, I think it's limited. I have a pro account, so it's been a little bit since I've been working in the free account. I know that you're limited with colors in the free account, so I think you can load up maybe like 3 colors in the brand kit, and they used to limit the number of brand kits as well. So that would be something just to keep an eye out if you've got the free account. But otherwise, with Pro, you've got more than you would probably ever need. And it is a good idea to have multiple brand kits, so if you're within your organization, you can create a brand kit for a campaign or for, a special project that you're working on. So it is nice to take advantage of that, the multiple brand kits.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are some important callouts for image licensing? If something is a stock photo found through Microsoft PowerPoint stock images, what should be checked before using that stock image in official materials?
Yes. So I would say, if you're using something within like those Microsoft applications, you've downloaded it within that application, you are most likely good with using it, say, within a presentation. But if you decided, oh, I want to turn this into an ad, you may want to check. And I'm not 100% sure on Microsoft as far as what their licensing is, because I don't really use Microsoft, to design. So it might be, probably on their website. There should be something. I'm going to look it up just so I'm aware of it for future presentations. But I would say, they make it available because they know that people are using it, for an internal presentation. But if you were making a t-shirt or an ad, that's where you really need to be careful, is what these photo companies are mostly concerned with is how many times that image will be seen. So they know that if it's like an internal presentation, it's not really getting out there that much. But if you're designing a t-shirt, you're designing an ad or putting on a website, well, that's a different type of license, because then it's being seen by a lot of people many, many times. So I would say, if you do decide to go that direction with something that you found within like a Microsoft product, then I would check their website, and probably just a Google search of Microsoft, photo usage would probably, pop it up. Just like Canva does have, and I have it in my resources, they do have a page that talks about using their images and how you can use them. Because again, you can't use it for like anything your heart desires. Like you can't use one of their in-house graphics or whatever for a logo, So yeah, it's really good to check, no matter where you're getting your images, check and see how you're able to use those.
Thank you. The next question is there a kind of standard imagery guide that one can use? I'm asking because design can be very subjective. What seems nice to someone might not be to someone else.
Yes, and I would say, use the general guidelines that we talked about today. So that hierarchy, the white space, the balance in a layout. And now those things, like the person had asked, someone else may think like, oh, that's boring. Well, then you might want to push it. And that's, like I mentioned with the fonts. If your design and your mood calls for it, maybe you do want 2 fonts that don't look like they go together and they're clashing, because that's the mood you're trying to portray. But if you're trying to portray a different type of mood where you want it to be a little more aligned, then maybe you don't want to choose those 2 different clashing fonts. So I would say that, yes, it's very subjective. One person might like this, I come across this quite often in my work, where somebody just doesn't like a color, and then I don't use that color because they don't like that color. So you do have to be a little bit aware of that, but I think using those basic principles won't steer you wrong. And then thinking about what is ultimately the mood you want to convey, the goal of the design. Now, today we didn't talk about that because there really wasn't time, but you always want to think about what the goal of the design is. So if you are you want people to engage, be interested, do perform a certain activity that's different than if you're doing something to really like shock people or surprise people. So, thinking about the goal is important. And I think that helps to create a design that is both aligned and, pleasing to the eye. To most people, you'll never please everybody with a design.
Thank you. Someone else is wondering, are there any general rules about pairing fonts, like serif fonts with sans serif?
Yeah, I would say there's no major rules with that. As you saw in the example, I paired a serif with a sans, but I chose two that I felt were complementary. So they both were a little bit rounded, had kind of a similar feel to them. So I would say, don't go crazy, like I said, with the fonts, but also don't limit yourself to only fonts that look alike. So we can definitely choose like the slab serif font and the sans serif font. They're very different, but if you have something that kind of pulls them together, then they'll look nice. And again, like sometimes the goal is two fonts that are very much aligned. And sometimes the goal is two fonts that are very different, so that maybe the headline stands out and then the body copy, is more in the background. So again, I would say with the fonts, like starting with your goal and, are you looking to have something really stand out? Well, then maybe that one should be in a different font style than the rest of the fonts. So yeah, I don't want to scare people like you always have to use the same fonts, but yeah, just be intentional is what I ask.
Thank you. And we do only have time for one more question, even though we do have multiple others. So everybody feel free to reach out to the presenter directly with the rest of your questions. But the last question we can ask now is, someone is wondering, mind telling us how much it would cost to become a beta tester? We're a small nonprofit with budget constraints.
Oh yes, for my program. Um, oh gosh, I think it would be best if email me. It's under 100. I know that for sure. I have to verify. I don't want to throw it out here, and then if I give you the wrong number, um, I think I had priced it around $50 for the beta testing. So feel free to reach out to me, and then I can give you all the details. I'm excited that you're interested. So thank you for asking.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Lydia. This workshop has come to a close. You will receive the materials and recording for this workshop via email by the end of the day tomorrow. Thank you so much for participating, and again, thank you, Lydia, for educating our community.
Thank you so much. Happy to answer questions.